So, how does the world go from peace to the brink of total war? Well, sometimes it happens slowly, and then all at once. Today, we're looking at 4 incredibly critical years. Years when the world began this slow, seemingly unstoppable slide into what would become the Second World War. We're going to see how a massive economic crash did way more than just close banks. It cracked open whole countries, paving the way for ambition, for aggression, and, yeah, for dictators.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the world in crisis, which really set the whole thing in motion. Then, we'll see how aggression started to flare up and kind of went unchecked. After that, we'll dive into how Hitler rose to power in Germany. And finally, we'll see how all these pieces fell into place, setting the stage for what was to come.
All right, let's get right into it. The year is 1931, and the whole world is just reeling, completely crippled by the Great Depression. I mean, think about this. Global trade had basically fallen off a cliff, down by 2/3. This wasn't just about businesses going under. No, this was a crisis that was about to change the entire political map of the world. So all of this economic chaos really started to divide the world into 2 big groups. On one side, you've got the established powers, the US, Britain, France, the guys who won the last war. They're just trying to keep everything from falling apart. But then, on the other side, you have these rising powers, Germany, Italy, Japan. They feel like they got a raw deal after World War I, and they look at this global crisis and think, maybe this is our chance.
And if you want to see where this pain was the absolute worst, look at Germany. Just look at that number, 40%. 40% unemployment, that's not just a statistic. That is a nation on the edge of collapse. You got to remember, their whole economy was propped up by American loans. And when Wall Street crashed, those loans just vanished. Germany was brought to its knees. And when people are that desperate, they start listening to the most extreme voices, making the most radical promises.
And out of all that desperation, this really powerful and really dangerous idea starts to take hold, not just in Germany, but in Italy and Japan too. And the idea is empire. Building an empire is the answer to everything. It's how you get resources. It's how you get new markets for your goods. It's how you restore your national pride. It was sold as this magic bullet, right? The ultimate fix for all their problems at home. And believe me, this wasn't just some abstract political theory. This talk of empire was about to turn into action. And the first domino to fall, well, it fell in Asia, and it fell hard.
So the first country to really make a move was Japan. And how they did it is just wild. In 1931, a group of Japanese army officers in a region of China called Manchuria literally blew up a piece of their own railway. They faked an attack. And this so-called Mukden incident was the perfect excuse they needed. Japan's army used it as a reason to just roll in and conquer the entire region. By 1932, they'd set up their own little puppet state there called Manchukuo. And just like that, Japan had the first piece of its brand new empire.
Okay, so you've got this flagrant violation of international law. It's a straight-up land grab. So what does the world's peacekeeper, the League of Nations, the organization literally created to stop this exact kind of thing, what do? You have to imagine the whole world is holding its breath, watching to see what happens next.
Well, the answer was basically nothing. Their response was completely toothless. They sent a commission to go investigate. It took them over a year just to write a report. And what did the report say? It said, yeah, Japan was wrong, but it recommended 0 consequences. No military action, no economic sanctions, nothing. Japan's response to this? They literally just stood up, walked out of the League of Nations, and never came back. The message this sent to every other ambitious country was crystal clear. The rules don't matter. You can get away with it.
And this paralysis wasn't just happening on the world stage. While everyone was looking at Japan, something absolutely horrific was unfolding inside the Soviet Union. Stalin's policies of collectivization created a massive man-made famine. We're talking millions of people, especially in Ukraine, starving to death. And it was all happening while the Soviets tried to cover it up. It just goes to show you, the big powers were so wrapped up in their own crises, they couldn't or wouldn't deal with anything else. And that failure to act in Manchuria, well, it was like a green light for anyone else with an appetite for conquest. And the most important person watching all this was back in Germany. A radical new leader saw the world was weak, saw his own country was broken, and realized this was his moment to grab for absolute power.
It's fascinating, right?
In March of 1933, you have Franklin D. Roosevelt becoming president in America, telling people the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and promising a New Deal. But at the very same time, a completely different kind of leader had just become Chancellor of Germany, Adolf Hitler. And his promises weren't about hope and recovery. They were about radical, revolutionary, and ultimately violent change. And the speed at which he moved is just breathtaking. We're talking about a little over 6 months to completely tear down a democracy. First, he's appointed chancellor. Then, the German parliament building, the Reichstag, mysteriously catches fire, and he uses that as the perfect excuse to suspend all civil liberties. Then comes something called the Enabling Act, which basically gives him dictatorial power. And by July, every other political party is just gone, banned. It was over. German democracy was dead. So with total control at home, Hitler immediately turned his attention to the rest of the world, and his moves were a direct slap in the face to the post-World War I order. He starts this huge secret rearmament program, totally illegal under the Treaty of Versailles. He goes to the World Disarmament Conference and basically gives them an ultimatum. Either you let us build our army up to be as big as France's, or we're out. They said no, so what did he do? He walked, not just from the conference, but from the League of Nations itself. He was following Japan's playbook step by step.
Now, there was some people shouting from the rooftops about this. Winston Churchill, over in Britain, for one. He saw exactly what was going on. He was warning everyone about this return of German military ambition. But honestly, most people just didn't want to hear it. Europe was still so scarred from the last war and so broke from the Depression that the thought of another conflict was just unthinkable. There was absolutely no appetite for it.
So now we get to 1934. And you can just feel the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The whole system designed to keep the peace is basically in ruins. And the countries that want to break the peace, well, they're getting stronger and bolder with every passing day. Back in Germany, Hitler was tying up the last loose ends to secure his absolute power. He turns on his own stormtroopers, the SA, and has their leadership murdered in what's called the Night of the Long Knives. Why? To prove to the old-school German army that he's in charge and win their loyalty. Then, the elderly President Hindenburg dies. Hitler doesn't even bother replacing him. He just merges the roles of president and chancellor. He is now simply the Führer, the leader. And he makes the entire army swear a personal oath of loyalty, not to the Constitution, not to Germany, but to him, Adolf Hitler. And internationally, any last little bit of hope for arms control just vanished into thin air. News breaks that Germany's army is already at 300,000 men. That's 3 times what they were legally allowed to have. And then Japan follows up by announcing they're tearing up the treaty that limited the size of the world's navies. So that's it. The guardrails are officially off. The whole idea of controlling weapons is dead, and a brand new, terrifying arms race has begun. So think about that. In just 4 years, from 31 to 34, the entire world changed. The whole system that was supposed to prevent another great war, it had completely failed. The countries that wanted peace were paralyzed and broke. And the countries that wanted war, they were armed to the teeth. They were ambitious, and most importantly, they had learned that nobody was going to stop them. A global conflict wasn't just possible anymore. It was starting to feel inevitable. The question wasn't if the world would go to war again. It was just a matter of when.